NVIDIA may be America's top performing stock after more than doubling this year alone. But if you're holding NVIDIA or thinking of buying it to get a stake in the 7 trillion AI market, you're going to want to see Mark Chaikin's new AI prediction first. Mark is a regular on many major news outlets from Fox Business to CNBC, and built the stock indicator Wall Street uses to find winning stocks. His award-winning system flashed buy on Tesla before it climbed 335%, Moderna before it climbed 300%, and Riot Blockchain before it climbed 10,090%. It also found NVIDIA at the start of 2023 before its massive bull run. But right now, Mark is stepping forward to warn people to stay away from NVIDIA. My system has indicated that NVIDIA is no longer the best stock to buy to profit from AI, Mark says. In fact, it just flashed buy on a totally different AI stock. And today, he'd like to hand you the name and ticker symbol of his #1 AI stock to buy right now. For a limited time, you can get this information for free at aifrenzy2023.com. Again, that's aifrenzy2023.com for a free copy of his new report. Hi, this is Daniela Cambone, and welcome back to the Daniela Cambone Show. Joining me today is David Tice. David is known for making bearish bets during bull markets. He now advises the AdvisorShares Ranger Equity Bear ETF, which has 70 million in assets under management. David, it's been quite a long time. I think the last time I saw you, you were producing Soul Surfer at the time. Now you're back with a new movie, which we'll talk about in a bit, Grid Down, Power Up. How have you been?
So good to be with you, Daniela. And I was just complimenting you on your career transition 4 years ago. And I've been great.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's, like I said, wonderful to see you after such a long time. And since you're the Bears bear, I was curious to get your thoughts on new data, which reveals a crash not seen since the Great Depression could hit in 2024. This is a report from Fox Business, which says survey data from the Federal Reserve now shows the bottom 80% of income earners, representing the vast majority of Americans, now have less in real household savings than they did prior to the pandemic. And savings for top income earners will likely fall below pre-2020 levels within the next 12 months. I mean, a crash bigger than the Great Depression, does this sound out of reach or a likelihood to you?
I think we are at great danger, Daniela. So I heard Paul Tudor Jones today, talking about our fiscal and monetary contractive conditions. We're at 122% of GDP for a deficit. We've had rates go from 3.3% on a 10-year to 4.64 or so just since May. And so that's like a 40% increase in rates. And essentially every percentage increase in rates is going to add 10% of GDP, for our total debt. And you look at what's going on geopolitically, we have Russia versus Ukraine. We're soon going to have probably China versus Taiwan, and then Hezbollah against Israel. So this is a really, really dangerous circumstance.
I mean, dangerous indeed. I mean, obviously you've heard World War III talk of that. I mean, how much of a blow up would we see here, David?
I mean, we could have a massive blow up. And you look at the fact we have for 2024, $2.7 trillion is going to be required to finance, our government. I mean, that is an unbelievable number. And therefore, the Fed is not going to be the only party here. I mean, we're going to be dependent upon the bond market. And therefore, we used to talk about bond vigilantes, but, that's going to come true again.
Well, speaking about exactly the bond market, I mean, look at what's happening in bond. Look at where the US dollar index is. I mean, what is that telling you? I mean, forget soft landing.
Well, so it was interesting. Jerome Powell, in a late September meeting, he was asked about a soft landing, and he interrupted the interviewer and he said, that is not, our base case here. So he said a soft landing was possible. I think the consensus has gotten a soft landing. I think that's ridiculous. What we're talking about is lag between tightening and an eventual recession. But a recession is coming. We ended up having a big credit card boom, for a few months. We had a resumption in growth in autos, for a few months, and that's ending. But this recession is coming, and it's going to be here by the end of the year, in our opinion. And therefore, we're going to have a much lower stock market.
What are you advising your clients, David?
So I'm advising them to take some money off the table and incorporate a bearish vehicle such as Ranger Equity Bear, HDGE. What people fail to realize about short selling is that short selling essentially takes equity exposure off the table. Everybody likes to be 100% long when the market's going up, and the S&P is up about 13% this year. But if you throw out 7 big stocks, the market's essentially flat. And so, but essentially, if you incorporate a fund like Ranger Equity Bear and you're short some of the most ridiculously valued companies, the over-leveraged companies very dependent upon an over-leveraged consumer, you essentially are creating a synthetic hedge fund where you have short exposure to offset your long exposure. And therefore, instead of being 100% long, you might be 70% net long because you have 30% net short exposure.
And besides from that, do you like holding cash? Do you like commodities?
I love cash. I'm still a gold bull. I also co-manage a gold equity, precious metals equity hedge fund. I think gold and silver are going to do incredibly well in this environment where around the world, U.S. global hegemony is being questioned. We saw the BRICS are going to be expanding, and they are certainly not very happy about, essentially how we're taking advantage of the U.S. dollar role as a global reserve currency. And although there's nothing out there to replace it at this point, there's going to be some movement more towards gold in the future. In my opinion.
Just one more question on the flight to safety, gold. I mean, are you surprised about gold's response to the crisis in the Middle East?
I think there's gold suppression. Maybe that makes me a conspiracy theorist, but I believe the powers that be do not like to see the price of gold rise.
Let's get your thoughts on gold suppression. Who do you believe is doing the suppressing?
Well, I think it's the powers that be generally. I'd say Wall Street, I'd say Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan, et cetera. I mean, Wall Street makes more money when, the financial markets are strong and gold tends to be the enemy of financial markets. Essentially, central bankers like to be able to manage things without gold, but essentially becoming essentially a stop on, ridiculous money printing, et cetera.
Central banks have been hoarding gold. I mean, China, 10 consecutive months of gold buying. Do you think that is that anything to do with price suppression, that they need to be buying gold?
Certainly, central banks are buying more and more gold around the world. There have been circumstances where I think it was J.P. Morgan, had penalties against them for
jail.
Again, I would refer people to Bill Murphy, fellow Dallas guy at GATA. Yeah,
good old Bill Murphy. David, let's talk a little bit about your recent, like I said, you wear many hats. One of them is also film producer, and you have a new movie, Grid Down, Power Up. How'd you get interested in the U.S. power grid, and what are your concerns?
So I've been a geopolitical junkie for more than 20 years. We were joking before that maybe that's, just David Dyer, but I tend to be a pragmatist and worried about, things that could go wrong. And you look at the fact that, as Paul Tudor Jones mentioned, as far as China, uh, Taiwan, Russia, Ukraine, Hezbollah, Israel, this is about as dangerous as period as we've ever seen. I've been worried about Russia and China for a couple decades. I actually had the highest ranking spy who ever defected from the Soviet Union in my living room about 15 years ago, who had testified in front of Congress behind a screen and his voice disguised. So I've been worried about that. And essentially, critical civilian infrastructure is a risk where our adversaries could take us down. And in fact, there was a recent Pentagon report, and the cybersecurity report was saying that if there is a battle, essentially our adversaries are going to come after our critical civilian infrastructure and essentially try to take down our power grid.
So, a physical attack, a cyber attack on the grids, what kind of, or any attack?
So our film, Grid Down, Power Up, and you can go and visit our website, griddownpowerup.com, and learn about it. We talk about the four big adversaries, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. We talk about four major threats. One is physical attack. Second is cyber attack. Third is an electromagnetic pulse attack, or an EMP. And then fourth is a geomagnetic disturbance, or a solar flare. All of those could essentially take out our sensitive electronics, our big transformers, and knock out power for an extended period of time, which could kill as many as 300 million Americans.
Because from what I understand, there's three main grids in the U.S.
Exactly. There's Texas, Western and Eastern power grids.
So this is all new for me, so I find this fascinating. Is there a reason that these grids are more vulnerable attacks compared to grids elsewhere in the world? Like, is there a reason that the U.S. grids are more susceptible to risk, or is it just because the U.S. is enemy numero uno?
Yes, it's more the latter, but then our partners, Israel and the UK, essentially have a top, person, responsible for protecting the grid. China, Russia are protecting their transformers and their sensitive electronics. Frankly, our regulators, because there's been regulatory capture where essentially the utility industry is essentially pretty much self-regulated, and my movie goes into some of that. And our utilities have not done all they should have to put on front-end measures to protect our grid.
And I think it gets people thinking, because unfortunately we always think about these things too light, but are we prepared in emergencies? Because the film raises the issues. You can't plug in your cell phone. Your refrigerator can't be plugged in. Are we prepared for an off-grid situation, right?
We're not at all prepared. And in fact, Ted Koppel wrote a book. He didn't talk about EMP, but this was back in 2015, 16. And he talked about the fact that we're prepared for so many other circumstances, but we are not prepared for the grid going down. This is my movie that you can see. It has Dennis Quaid narrating it. And it's won a number of awards. We have George Carlin, talking about how dangerous it is if the grid goes down, as well as a number of 4-star generals.
And congratulations on the success of it. Again, I think it's just more important to get people thinking, because, as the news broke in the Middle East, I would turn to my husband and I was just thinking, like, about our emergency box at home. I was like, is that radio working, or the flashlights? These are checklists that we just don't think about day to day, but then crisis happens and you're completely naked, vulnerable, exposed. So, yeah.
That's exactly right. And the thing is, Daniela, it is so preventable because our military has protected our command control centers. They have protected our missile systems. And we have a 4-star General John Hyten, who is the prior vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he was saying, yes, we've prepared all that, from a military standpoint, but our critical civilian infrastructure, not so much.
So on a scale of, if I were to ask you 1 to 10 of probability of grid going down, how likely is it for you?
I'd say it's 100%. It will eventually happen with a geomagnetic disturbance. Okay, so that is a coronal mass ejection, something similar to what we had with the Carrington event. So if you think the bad guys aren't ever going to do anything, you think North Korea, Iran, Russia will never come after us, but frankly, we know from the playbooks, from defectors, from these major 4 adversaries. We just have this recent report out of the Pentagon in terms of cyber attacks going after critical civilian infrastructure. It's likely to come.
And this may be an extremely ignorant question, so excuse my ignorance, David, but is there not some sort of magic lever or button that they can press as a backup if the grids go down? Is there not a backup to a backup, like a plane?
Nope. There's nothing. Essentially, we have these massive transformers, that weigh multiple tons each, and essentially it requires 2 to 5 years to get a backup.
Yeah.
But if our grid goes down for an extended period of time, there was something called the EMP Commission, and it reported to Congress. It operated for 17 years, and it was staffed by the best scientists in the world. And they found that if our grid goes down nationwide for an extended period of time, we could lose up to 90% of American citizens.
That's absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, you obviously, how long did you work on this film? I mean, how much research did you went into this?
I worked on it for 3 years, and we had a premiere in Los Angeles about 9 months ago, but we were preparing for a global launch on Amazon and YouTube. This is coming in the next few weeks. And we really urge everybody to watch it, tell their friends. We also have a facility by which you can, a few clicks of your mouse, you can send letters, make phone calls, write emails, petitions to your regulators, legislators, and board of directors of utilities.
Last question for you before I let you go, because in 2021, you warned investors, bringing it back to investments here for a second, to stay away from cryptos. Have you pivoted on cryptos since? Well, let's be specific. Bitcoin.
Okay, so Bitcoin, actually, in one of the funds that I managed, it was a fiat money defense fund. We actually bought, Bitcoin back at 10,000, and I rode it to 50,000. Wasn't a big enough bet, but I've been negative since. Frankly, I'm very, very worried about Tether. I'm worried that there's going to be some fallout from that. I'm not 100% sure on this. I love Paul Tudor Jones. Paul Tudor Jones, given our fiat money environment, says that, it's probably worth a small bet, in addition to gold. So I can't necessarily argue too strongly against that.
David Tice, it was really good seeing you after years. So thank you for coming on my show.
Glad to be with you, Danielle. You have very smart listeners. Keep up the good work.
Do. I have, like I said, I have the best viewers out there. Very fortunate. Thank you, David. And thank you all for watching, my lovely, lovely audience. Keep tuning in. Sign up at danielacambone.com to stay on top of it all. That's it for me. Thanks for watching.
Opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the contributor and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Stansberry Research, its parent company, or affiliates.